Oh, okay. All right. We just connected to YouTube. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today from Zoom's and YouTube streaming. I'm Rahmat Effendi from the External Economic Relations Division at the ASEAN Secretariat. I'll be your host today, and it's my pleasure to guide you through the sessions. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. All participant camera and microphone has been disabled, but should you have any questions during the presentations and the panel discussions, please just type them into the questions box in your Zoom control, and we'll be able to answer all of your questions after the panel discussions. Sorry. Today is the second of our webinar series of Unlocking RCEP for Webinar. We'll today focus on Trade in Goods chapter. This webinar is in collaboration with the East Asian Business Council, EABC, as part of our effort to promote and create awareness on RCEP. The previous webinar is available in YouTube, so please do check it out. And so today's session will consist of 3 presentations, which will focus on rules of origins, operational certification procedure, and custom procedures and trade facilitation. And this also will be followed panel discussions to discuss the implication and future prospect of the RCEP in these 3 key areas. First of all, I would like to give the screen to His Excellency Satvinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General for the ASEAN Economic Community, for an opening remark. DSD Singh, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Rahmat. A very good morning to everyone, Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, participants. A very good morning to all of you, wherever you are. I'm hoping that all of you are well. It gives me deep pleasure to be able to be welcoming all of you to the second series of the RCEP webinar, which is hosted by the ASEAN Secretariat and our partners, the East Asia Business Council. As it was, as what Rahmat said, this is part of as part of the follow-up on the first series that was held in July. The focus of our discussion today is still going to be in trade in goods, and obviously we all know that this is the whole entire space of trade in goods. It's truly full of complexity of issues. And naturally, I'm sure all participants are going to welcome the need to be able to hear from our distinguished panelists and to be able to understand some of the technical details in understanding more in depth in terms of the entire trade of goods chapters that are coming out in our agreement. I will once again like to thank the high caliber of the speakers and panelists who have agreed to share their insights. And they are going to take us through their expertise on the rules of origin, on product-specific rules, even on operational certification procedures and custom procedures. And I think this and other things are going to be discussed today. So I do hope all of you panelists, I know we are speaking virtually, but I hope all of you will take this opportunity to also be interactive and take this opportunity to tap on the experts who are going to be discussing all these issues in detail. Trade in goods, as all of you understand, is definitely an area of great importance to all of our ASEAN economic performance. As you all know, the value of ASEAN trade in goods is actually very significant. It stands around 2.24 trillion. And that was in 2000, it has actually grown from 2.26 trillion in 2016 to 2.82 trillion in 2019. However, in 2020, as all of you know, due to the economic downturn caused by the pandemic, the numbers had gone down slightly to about $2.66 trillion US dollars. And I think this is why all of us in the ASEAN and our private sectors are truly looking forward to the RCEP agreement, hoping that it will, when it comes into force, help to contribute to our economic recovery and our resilience. Therefore, I do believe that the good understanding of the technicalities and the details of the regulations under the RCEP agreement, especially amongst our small, medium-sized enterprises, will help assist the business community in the region to benefit from the preferences that have now being already negotiated, is now in fact ready to be implemented, has been offered by the RCEP Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to focus my discussion and remarks today more on the potential impact of the RCEP Agreement in the post-pandemic recovery effort. I think overall, as you all know, ASEAN economy had contracted by 3.3% minus last year. I think while our ASEAN's total trade was also down 5.5% together with our FDI, it also fell by almost 25%. I think moving forward this year, it's not going to be so bleak. I think we are anticipating that the entire region is going to grow by estimated about 4%, even taking into account the difficult times the ASEAN capitals are going through, especially with the fresh lockdowns brought about by Delta. And we are also beginning to see that both trade and FDI numbers are also beginning to withstand, and we are going to come out this year looking better. But again, we all at the same time know that this resiliency and growth is not across all sectors. There are certain sectors more impacted by the COVID, and they will probably remain affected for a longer time. And definitely our informal sectors and those sectors related to services sectors that are related to people contact, I think those are the ones that are going to continue remaining affected by the pandemic moving forward. But generally, I think the economy is moving forward. And what is important is that I think taking the situation as we see today, most of the RCEP participating countries, they all are hoping and they all are targeting 1st January 22, the date of entry of the force of the agreement. And this is because we sincerely believe that the RCEP agreement is going to bring tangible benefits to businesses in the region. The agreement is targeted to help lower our trade costs, as well as it will also help to further integrate our ASEAN producers into the global value chains by simplifying and streamlining the rules related to trade in goods. I think more importantly, we all strongly believe that RCEP is going to help businesses in the ASEAN to harness much more opportunities amongst all of the 15 participating countries. Basically, we are hoping the new demand is generated for all. In order for that to happen, the simplified trade rules under the RCEP agreement, especially the rules of origin, the customs procedures, and trade facilitation measures, they all will give the most important, or what I call the value addition on top of the existing ASEAN Plus One FTAs. Now, especially since you will hear also from the speakers that RCEP really aims to streamline the different rules that are existing today across all the participating countries into a single set of rules for the 15 participating important global economies of ASEAN, which includes Japan, China, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and of course, all of us, 10 ASEAN countries. But in order to take advantage of the opportunities presented by RCEP agreement, I think it's important for businesses to pay attention and to truly navigate the rules and measures related to the rules of origin and trade facilitation. And I'm glad that these are the particular areas that our panelists are going to further expand later on in our discussion. In fact, this is where I hope, once again, that the panelists are able to take through and there'll be an active discussion on some of the details into the issues concerning these areas. Another important area that I would like to highlight at this juncture is the need to ensure an inclusive, effective, and an efficient implementation and utilization of the RCEP agreement once it enters into force. As mentioned earlier, this agreement definitely has tremendous benefits for exporters, and its usefulness only goes as far as its proper utilization by the businesses. And we all kind of know that sometimes the previous low utilization rate of other FTAs, they've been associated with the fact of lack of capacity, lack of resources of the small, medium-sized enterprises to comply with trade requirements, and sometimes just simply the lack of awareness. Now, I think this is where the technical cooperation provision under the RCEP agreement comes into play. The agreement actually includes a dedicated chapter on economic and technical cooperation, as well as a cooperation provision under other chapters, including the customs chapter. Now, these provisions, they all aim, among other things, to maximize mutual benefits among the parties. And since in most of the ASEAN member states, the SMEs represent almost close to 95 to 97% of all firms, and they account for almost 60 to 80% of employment, it's very important that we ensure their participation and understanding of all of the technical cooperation programs. And I do feel that these programs hopefully will be inclusive, and they will ultimately help the better understanding and acceptance amongst the SMEs, as well as hopefully the RCEP utilization rate. Finally, we are doing our utmost effort to increase business awareness, including today's seminar. Again, we cannot have done it with all our partners. Our hope is that this kind of events will improve the understanding of the RCEP agreement amongst the private sector, who actually eventually are going to be the main beneficiaries. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our hope that the webinar today is going to provide some light onto the technicalities and the operationalization of the trade in goods related provisions, and hopefully will provide the clarity to some of the lingering questions that the business community and region might have. And I'm hoping that you also help facilitate some networking too of the businesses from the RCEP participating countries. Without much ado, can I also now wish all of you participants and also the panelists a very productive and fruitful discussion this morning. I hand over back to you, Rapan. Thank you.
Thank you, DSG. So now I would like to invite all of our speaker and panelists for a short photo opportunity. Okay, all camera are on. I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. RCEP. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Let me. All right. So without further ado, may I now give the screen to Mr. Surin. He's the Assistant Director General, Department of Trade Negotiation, Ministry of Commerce, Thailand, to walk us through the streamlined rules of origins under RCEP agreement. Mr. Surin, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, I need to I want to thank ASEAN Secretariat for arranging this webinar and for getting me joining this webinar as well. This reminding me of the good time I had during the RCEP negotiations. It was my pleasure working with expert and professional from RCEP participating countries. May I proceed to the next slide? This slide will show you, today the topic is rules of origin. I showed you on screen the overall pictures of rules of origin. This is what you encounter when we enter into rules of origin world. Roughly, you can divide them into 2 sections: rules of origin itself, and the second one is the operational certification procedures. That's a big section that we have. And under the rules of origin, we can break down further into origin criteria and other matters. You will see many provisions, vocabulary here. Under origin criteria, we have only obtained, usually, substantial transformation and sometimes produced exclusively or PE. I showed you this slide because I found out that when they talk to many people about rules of origin, they often talk to me about the RVC component or the CTC rules, if I feel like they focus only just on the origin criteria, on the rules applied directly to the product. But in fact, that's not all. You need, or you should understand all the provisions within the rules of origin world, because something will help you. For example, accumulation and de minimis, it will help you if you fail the origin criteria. At the same time, minimal operations and process could ruin your origin by not complying with the direct consignment provisions or others provisions under rules of origin chapter could cause you trouble. We will see that there are a lot of things in these pictures. That's why it is very tough for rules of origin negotiations in any FTA. You see here that in order to negotiate or discuss the matter of rules of origin, you need to have a wide range of knowledge. For example, the production pattern of the product, supply chain management, custom procedures, and also your national trade interests. And that make it difficult, make it tough when we negotiate rules of origin. And it took us, next slide please, 7 years, or more than 7 years to break through and to conclude the origin chapter under RCEP. It consists of 35 articles. We can break it down to big sections: rules of origin and the OCP. The OCP will be covered by will be in good hands of my good colleagues, Ms. Ting Nang. And it actually is not just 2 sections, section A, section B, and we have 2 more appendix on PSR and on the minimal information requirement. Why it took us that long to finish this negotiation? It is because it is even more complicated for RCEP to agree on rules of origin because we have a divergent states of development amongst the RCEP member. You have in some members seem to be able to produce just almost everything by themselves. On the other hand, some other members already established production network globally, and they want to use their supply from non-party to produce a product in ASEAN. That's a different approach that we have, and that's difficult for them to agree on one rules, use the same rule. Rules of origin is different from market access. When we negotiate tariff reduction or tariff elimination, we have our own tariff schedule that they can accommodate our sensitivity. But on rules of origin, we have to agree on the rule and we use the same rule together. That make it easy, more difficult. Next, please. And I just show you our 7 years of work. Section A, we have 15 articles. In brief, if we have to single out the purpose of this section, I will say that this section will give you an idea of how to get origin status. Next, please. Section B will be covered by Ting Nang. This, if I have to single out, this section will tell you how to make use of the origin status that you just obtained from section A. So both sections work together and they are Very important if you want to make use of rules of origin. Next, please. Both in RCEP, we have three major origin criteria in determine the origin status that will tell you which product is eligible for the tariff preferential treatment under RCEP. The first one, polyobtained. The second one, produced exclusively, or we call PE. And the last one, if you cannot meet either of the two criteria that you try to meet a condition under the PSR, we have RVC components, CTC rules, specific production rules there under the PSR. May I go next, please? Briefly on the concept of polyobtained. It's quite common. The polyobtained criteria mainly apply to the unprocessed food, such as live animal, fresh food, and raw vegetable. To understand it, something is polyobtained when you the product that you obtain or produce wholly in the party is sure to have the polyobtained status and eligible for the preferential treatment under RCEP. For example, live animal that born and raised in the party got the polyobtained status. Mineral extract from soil, water, and seabed in the party that got the polyobtained status. Plant, fruits, and flower, vegetable, which grown and harvest or gather in the party is originate in that party. Next, please. We get to PE, the produce exclusively, or PE. This is something new that I need to highlight as a value added in RCEP. PE means good which are produced in the party exclusively from originating material from one or more of the party. In the example in the slide show you, let's say, suppose that Thailand produce canned tuna, and if the material for the canned tuna had only three things: tuna, the can, and the vegetable oil. If Thailand use the originating fish from Japan, the originating can from South Korea, and the originating vegetable oil from Malaysia, like I show on the slide, then the canned tuna in Thailand can gain status as under the PE term, could be originating under RCEP, as a PE, under PE provisions. But if Thailand decide to use some of the components from non-party, then PE is not applicable here. Next, please. I need to highlight that in RCEP, RCEP member agree that the PE criterions can be applied to all tariff line. I have to mention that it's not easy for us to reach such an agreement. And currently, you see that only RCEP, ASEAN China FTA, ASEAN Japan FTA, and ASEAN Australia FTA allow PE, allow the use of PE. We believe that these provisions would allow RCEP member to become a production base for each other. It will enhance the way business source of the material within the regions. Next, please. This is summary of the use of PE in our ASEAN +1 and ASEAN FTA. You see that under ASEAN Trade Goods FTA, the Article, ASEAN Korea FTA, and ASEAN India FTA, we do not have PE, but we do have one under RCEP. Next, please. Product specific rules. This is something I'm very proud of. You see in RCEP, member agree to apply product specific rules for every tariff line. That means there is no general rules in RCEP. All 5,205 products at the 6-digit level of the harmonized 2012 have their own product specific rules, which reflect their production pattern. Of course, the number of the products changed, but now we using 2017. As ASEAN and most ASEAN plus one FTA apply general rules for majority of products and PSR for a limited number of products. But need to highlight that under ASEAN India FTA, we apply general rules of RVC 35 plus CTSH to all products. So we have a different approach here. Next, please. I need to highlight. I want to show you these pictures. You see on the woman on the white clothes. She wears a free side coat. You see with the free side coat. It seems it could be too big for someone, and could be too tight for others. But if you tailor-made the clothes, then it will always fit each of you. PSR, when we compare general rules and PSR, we can compare this way. General rules like a one size fit all, free size cloth. It could be too lenient or for some products, but it could be too restrictive for some others product. But when we use the PSR, it's a tailor-made for each product. Then we believe that the rules will reflect the production pattern of each product, and that will we have a better rule. That server approach and never believe in why we make this rule. Next, please. This is a summary of the use of the origin criteria among ASEAN FTA. You see that only ASEAN India is the only one FTA that do not have PSR. But on the other hand, RCEP use PSR for every single tariff line and do not apply general rules. Next, please. In brief, I need to highlight that PSR in RCEP could increase the utilization rate of RCEP agreement because it's offer single rules and co-equal rules. We do not allow the combination rules or the plus rule like we just showed in the previous slide because we believe that the combination rule will be unnecessary and too difficult for business to follow because you need to meet two criteria. And the product nature is the main consideration during the PSR negotiation. So we believe that the RCEP PSR is more consistent with the production process of each product. Next, please. This slide will show you the problem we had, why we need to, why RCEP is better. In our existing ASEAN and ASEAN plus one FTA, we have a lot of rules. We have different rules applying to the same product. For example, for canned tuna, we have 4 different rules in 6 ASEAN FTA. RCEP 40 or CC for one, then under AJSF you have CC except chapter 3, which is tough. ASEAN China FTA, we have RCEP 40 or CC. ASEAN Korea, this is RCEP 40 or CTH. For ASEAN India, you always have RCEP 35 plus CTHS. But for RCEP, you've got single CC. For sugar is even more difficult. In the 6 existing FTA, we end up having 5 different rules. RCEP 40 or CC, and then we got other AJSF, we got CC except chapter 12. In ASEAN China FTA, we got Polio 10 rules, and in AK we got RCEP 40 or CTH, and for ASEAN India we got RCEP 35 plus CTHs. But in RCEP we just go with RCEP 40 or CC. Same apply to preserved fruit. We have 4 different rules for these preserved fruits, 3 different rules on diesel engines, and 3 different rules on refrigerators. And so if we stick with RCEP, then you don't need to adjust your production pattern each time you export to different market under different FTA. You can export to China, Japan, any ASEAN members with one rules that we have under RCEP. We believe that it would help you in terms of the production and in terms of the documentation necessary when you use the rules of origin. And next, please. Chemical reaction rule is a new thing we have in RCEP, and I have to highlight that these rules, this provision almost kill our negotiations, because members, RCEP members have different view on this, and we seem not to be able to make any compromise. Those who want this rule really want them. Those who oppose this rule cannot live with them. That's a difficult. But eventually we manage to compromise, and we allow these rules to apply in some of our products in RCEP. Next, please. Need to highlight that RCEP is the first FTA among ASEAN members to allow the chemical reaction rules applies as a co-equal. In fact, we under the ASEAN Australia New Zealand FTA, we allow the application of chemical reaction rules, but in that FTA we apply it as a sequential rules. That means you got to prove that you cannot, if you fail, you cannot meet the regional the RVC component or the CTC rules. In that case, you can use the chemical reaction. But if but you cannot, but in RCEP, you do not have to try the RVC component or CTC rule. You can just start with the chemical reaction rules. We as a we call alternative rules as or co-equal rules in RCEP. Under RCEP 78 lines under chapter 29, the organic chemicals, and chapter 38, miscellaneous chemical product, can use the chemical reaction rules as a co-equal rules. That's new things under RCEP. Next, please. This is a summary of the methodologies of the determining origins. You see that RCEP have more varieties of the criteria that better offer you a better choice when you decide to make use of an FTA. Next, please. And at this point, I would say that apart from many others merit of RCEP, one of the things that I need to highlight is that RCEP provide you a choice of forum. You can look at article, tariffs, commitment, and rules of origin. Look at the ones under ASEAN China, the ones under AKFTA, and see what fit you most in terms of tariff, commitment, and rules of origin. And then you decide by yourself to make use of that particular FTA. Next, please. Accumulation. I need to highlight that accumulation is value added, value added in RCEP. In fact, in RCEP, we do not have a fancy or modern accumulation methodologies. RCEP just allow originating material to be accumulated among 15 member states. This is not new concept. We find this methodology in any ASEAN +1 FTA. But this accumulation is just work better under RCEP context when we compare to ASEAN +1 because of the bigger number of the number of the members is bigger in RCEP. We have 15 in RCEP. We have just 10 in ASEAN. We have 11 or 12 in ASEAN +1 FTA. The broader scope of ASEAN of RCEP member state make it better on the accumulation of the product. Next, please. In RCEP, if your material is originated, if the material qualify the origin criteria, then the value of that material is counted or could be added into your finished product 100%. But if you fail or you use non-originating product, then you cannot apply any value into your any value of the material into your finished product. This is a picture of the presentation. I think some member, I cannot remember which one, show this pictures, try to explain during the meeting. This is a good one. So in RCEP, when we have when we finish the RCEP negotiation, I got one question from my colleague asking, saying that Thailand and ASEAN members, we already have an FTA with each of the ASEAN +1 partner. So what is the benefit of RCEP? So I tell you, I tell them, accumulation is the major benefit for RCEP trade goods. ASEAN +1 FTA, we have 5 different FTA but we cannot link them easily in terms of supply chain. But since we brought them, all of them of 15 countries into the same roof, then the flow of materials will be better. And we believe that the supply chains, the way we source material and the way we access to the market of the RCEP member is better comparing to the ASEAN Plus One FTA. Next, please. Proof of origin is under the OCP, so we believe it's to Ding Nan to cover this part. But I just want to give you a brief idea on proof of origin. This is an improvement because we have a certificate of origin. It's quite common in any ASEAN Plus One FTA, and then under RCEP we have a self-certification by approved exporter and also self-declaration. That's make it easier for you when you want to make use of the FTA. Next, please. Next, please. In brief, I want to highlight that under RCEP, the rules origin is somehow more liberal when compared to other ASEAN Plus One. So the introduction of line by line PSR will facilitate the business when they decide to use RCEP as the for their preparatory treatment. And also the proof of origin in RCEP is easier than any other ASEAN Plus One FTA. And the last one, the accumulation, we believe that the RCEP allow originating good from one member state to be used as a material in the production of a new product of another member state that provide a wider source of raw material and get a chance of meeting the origin criteria. Thank you. Next, please. I'm done for now. This our group photo when we finish the negotiation in Da Nang on the PSR. I'm finished my session. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Surin. So next up, we have Ms. Ding Nan. She's the Deputy Director, Office of ROO, Department of Duty Collections, General Administration of China Customs. Ms. Ding will share with us the operational certification procedure, including the minimum operation requirement and declaration of origin by exporter. So without further ado, over to you, Ms. Ding.
Thank you very much. So, following the introduction of tourism, I'm going to introduce the OCP of RCEP. Next slide, please. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ding Nan. I'm from China Customs, and I have been working in the area of rules of origin for more than a decade. So during the negotiation, I was the representative of China for ROO. As a negotiator, I just would like to talk to our audience that during the negotiations, all the negotiators have worked their best towards the best interest from their countries, companies, and their country. So, however, we have 15 countries. Therefore, we have different directions and interests. So what you have been seeing now for the RCEP rules of origin, including OCP, are the result of negotiation, and that's also contains a lot of coordinates and compromises from each other. So I hope that all the companies, when you are using this OCP and rules of origin, and you will make the best, make the biggest effort to use it and to facilitate our trade and productions. So for RCEP operational certification procedures in the FTA, this is the title of the second part of rules of origin chapter. And there are 19 articles in it. It's from 3.16 to 3.34. And there are 3 parts of the OCP. The first part of the articles are related to proof of origin. And the second part is related to the input customs clearance. And there is another part which is not shown on the slide, is about the implementation mechanism. For example, the consultation between the parties, communication language, transposition of PSR, and so on. So the third part is not the we are quite interested today because they are not related to business. It is only about how to cooperate between the parties. So today I will be focusing on the first 2 parts, which is proof of our origin and import customs clearance. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just as Susan mentioned before, that the highlight of RCEP OCP, including the different types of proof of origin. Unlike traditional RCEP +1 FTA, including RCEP China FTA, we only used certificate of origin as the only proof of origin. However, in RCEP, we have certificate of origin, different kinds of declaration of origin, and back-to-back proof of origin. So these more types of proof of origin can reduce the cost of business operation because you may always choose the most appropriate one for your business. And it can, of course, improve the timeliness of customs clearance of goods because all this kind of proof of origin, as long as they are valid, they need to be accepted by the importing customs. And the third good point is that it can improve the international competitiveness of enterprises because you may organize your own proof of origin region inside your company so that and this proof of origin can be region can help you to sell or buy products from 15 countries inside RCEP region. And also we have the back-to-back proof of origin in RCEP OCP because this is a very typical proof of origin, which is our ASEAN companies and our companies are quite get use of. So this back-to-back proof of origin can facilitate the circulation of goods in RCEP area because when your goods will be re-exported or be transported to more than 2 countries, this proof of origin can help you a lot. I will explain the detail later. And secondly, it can expand the trade between RCEP members. And thirdly, it will promote the integration of regional supply chains and industrial chains. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first part is proof of origin. We have more or less three kinds of proof of origin. The first kind is the one we are very familiar with, is the certificate of origin. It will be issued by the issuing body. The second big part is the declaration of origin, and this is more complicated, and we need to explain the details later. And the third kind is back-to-back proof of origin. And all of these three kinds of proof of origin need to be in accordance with the MIR, minimal information requirements, which is stipulated in the Annex 3B in our FTA. So I will get into the detail. Next slide, please. The CO and DO, we say certificate of origin and the declaration of origin. CO and DO are both valid for 1 year. For 1 year after it is issued or completed. And CO is issued by issuing bodies. DO will be completed by approved exporters, or if the company already applies the region of declaration of origin by exporter to producers, it will also may be completed by exporters, producers, or even in Japan, it may be completed by importer. Next slide, please. Get into the detail. For certificate of origin, according to RCEP FTA, it should be in a set format. And this format actually is now in the negotiation between the experts. And after it is finished, it will be released and announced to all public interests. So it will be definitely in a set format. And secondly, it needs to have the unique serial number. This unique serial number will help the importing party
We are experience a technical difficulty. I think Ms. Ding will back to us shortly. Ms. Ding is going to log in, so just give us a few more minutes. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. So can I be here now? Okay.
Yes, we hear you clearly.
Okay, just in order that my network will work, so I just closed my camera. I apologize for that. Just during this presentation. So I'm not sure where was I when the last time you heard me. So I will introduce continuous. So if the exporter, after the goods are exported from the exporting country, the exporter or producer may still apply to the issuing body for a certificate issued retroactively with a reasonable reason, of course. And also we have a regular certified true copy for the certificates. And one certificate can include 2 or more invoices for a single shipment. And I think this will also help the traders, not only the producer, but traders a lot for reducing the time for applying the certificate of origin. Next slide, please. And for DO, it's a little bit more complicated because we have 3 kinds of DO. It doesn't mean the format or the requirements for DO have 3 types. It's only because the one who complete DO can be categorized into 3 kinds. We can, from the first day of enforcement, all parties will allow their approved exporter to complete declaration of origin, and this will be viewed valid in all importing parties. So this is the first kind. Therefore, we will also need the requirements for approved exporters so that they are familiar with the rules of origin of RCEP, and they will obey all the requirements for them. So this is the first category. The second category are the exporter or producers. And there is an implementing time schedule for that. I will introduce it in the next slide. And the third type would be DO by importer. However, according to the FTA, only Japan will implement this scheme from day one. Actually, it should be saying that FTA only allows Japan to implement declaration of origin by importers from day one. Therefore, and also in the FTA, parties will review after some years of implementation and to consider whether this type of declaration of origin should be invited in RCEP. And no matter what kind, who complete DO according to the FTA, they need to obey the same requirements for DO. That is, first, it should be in accordance with the minimum information requirements. And secondly, it should be in English. And thirdly, it needs the signature of the one who complete this declaration of origin. And then the DO need to indicate the date when it was completed, because we have the validity for 1 year for DO as well as RCEP. Next slide, please. I mentioned that the declaration of origin by different types have the different implementation time schedule. So for approved exporters, once our FTA enters into force, we will immediately implement it in all parties. Secondly, for the exporters and producers. We have a time frame that in no later than 10 years, Australia, Brunei, China, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam will implement this regime. That is declaration of origin by exporters or producers. So here, the exporters doesn't need to be approved exporters. So I think some of our FTA partners will implement it right away as the FTA enter into force. And remember that the implementation here means both accepting the DO as the importing party, as well as allow their exporter and producer to issue as the exporting party. So the implementation of this exporter and producer for DO means both in input and export. And as I mentioned earlier, currently only Japan has the right to accept DO by importers, and they will of course have their domestic regulations for the detailed implementation requirements. And in this kind of DO, Japan cannot conduct verification to the exporting party, including the exporters, producers. They need to rely on their importers for the verification. Next slide, please. I think we jumped over one page. Yes, thank you. So for the declaration of origin completed by approved exporter, of course, it will be applied, implement immediately. So in the FTA, there are requirements for the approved exporter. First of all, it should be registered in accordance with laws. This means domestic legislations. So including China, we will release our requirements for approved exporter, for Chinese approved exporter. And then the approved exporter will always need to be registered according to the domestic registrations. And secondly, and very important one, they need to know and understand rules of origin. Otherwise, they are not capable to complete a declaration of origin. And of course, they need the experience in export, and they need to have good compliance to the domestic regulations, to the FTA requirements. And if the approved exporter is not the producer of the goods, they need to obtain declaration by the producer. And here it is very clear about the obligations for the producer and the trader. So as the producer, of course, you need to take the full responsibility to the goods you are completing the declaration of origin. And for the trader, you have the obligation to make sure the one that the goods are originating before you complete the declaration of origin. And approved exporter also need to have the well-maintained bookkeeping system. This is to facilitate the post-verification from the importing party. Thank you. Next slide, please. Also, for the obligation of approved exporter, they need to only issue the declaration of origin for the goods allowed. For some parties, they may allow all approved exporters to issue goods from Chapter 1 to Chapter 97. But some parties may have different requirements. So this part is totally up to the exporting party to decide. And the parties will exchange the information or update the information whenever the information of approved exporter has changed. And the exporting parties need to manage the approved exporters. They need to give the authorizations, and they need to establish database to facilitate the importing party to verify. And also they have to monitor the use of authorization whenever the approved exporter are not acting well. They will withdraw the authorization to the approved exporter. So this part is the obligation of the exporting party, their competent authority. Next slide, please. The third big part of proof of origin is the back-to-back proof of origin. I think all the companies in RCEP region is familiar to the back-to-back proof of origin. But for example, in China ASEAN FTA, we use the movement certificate. Anyway, they're similar. So first of all, under RCEP, we have both CO and DO. Therefore, the back-to-back will not only include CO, but also including DO. And also, no matter you are using CO or DO to act from country A to country B, and then further to country C, the type of proof of origin issued in country A will not have to be coordinate or consistent with the back-to-back proof of origin in country B. Therefore, that means even a CO is issued in the country A, country B, the approved exporter will have the right to complete DO as the back-to-back proof of origin. So, but for the last part, country C, they will apply the same verification procedures, no matter the proof of origin they received is CO or DO or back-to-back CO or DO. So basically, back-to-back proof of origin is designed to facilitate the goods to be further traded or transported there within our region. So personally, I think this is a very, very good region. Although in China, we didn't apply it in the both FTAs, only in China ASEAN, but we think it will be more utilized on the RCEP. And next slide, please. So for back-to-back proof of origin, first of all, you need a valid original proof of origin or certified true copy. So this proof of origin will be provided to the issuer of back-to-back proof of origin. And also for the verification, when the importing party is verify the authenticity or the originating status of the goods, they will get to the country B first. So if country B do not have the valid or original proof of origin, this could be a big issue. And secondly, the date of issuance and the reference number of the country A's proof of origin need to be shown on the back-to-back proof of origin. The period of validity will be consistent with the original one. And the relevant information also need to be the same. This back-to-back proof of origin only certifies that the goods are not undergone further processing in the intermediate party. Therefore, the total quantity on the back-to-back cannot exceed the original proof of origin. And they're all logically. Next slide, please. So I have the comparison of the MIR for CO and DO. Generally, they are similar. First of all, we need the exporter, producer, importer, consignee's name and address for CO and DO. So you see, if this column is crossing CO and DO, that means we have the same requirement. And secondly, both of them need the description of goods, quantity, HS code, which is in 6-digit level, and FOB value. If it is applying the RVC criteria, if the goods are applying CTC criteria or chemical reactions, then the FOB value is not compulsory requirement. And we need the CO number. And similarly for DO, if it is completed by approved exporter, the authorization code, or to say identification code, need to be indicated. And also DO need the unique reference number as well. Otherwise, if different companies are using the same number, this DO cannot be traced back and cannot be referred to the actual imported goods. And both of CO and DO needs origin confirming criterion. And CO will also include the declaration by exporter and producer. And CO will have the certification by issuing body. Similarly, DO will have the certification by authorized signatory. Actually, this DO requirement equals to the previous two requirements for CO. And both of them meet the RCEP country of origin. And CO need the details to identify the consignment, but this is not compulsory requirement for DO. And both of them, if they are back-to-back, they also need to include the previous information as date of issuance, reference number, period of validity, and so on the back-to-back proof of origin. Next slide, please. So for import customs clearance, we have also several articles here from we have the claim for preferential tariff treatment, post-importation claim for preferential tariff, denial of preferential tariff treatment, which is related to third-party invoicing, minor discrepancies, and we have the transitional provisions for goods in transit, which will only be useful in the first stage of implementation. And we have the verification and record keeping requirements. All of these 8 articles are related to the import customs clearance, and I think our companies will also have much interest in this one to see how they can comply with the FTA. Next slide, please. So the claim for preferential tariff treatment, we have 3 parts of, generally we have 3 parts of requirements. And first of all, you need to declaration of the originating status. And secondly, the importer need to possess with valid proof of origin and submit if the importing customs requires. And this valid proof of origin should be original one or a certified true copy. And thirdly, the goods need to comply with the direct consignment requirements. Next slide, please. For RCEP, we also have the article for post-importation claims for preferential tariff. So if the importer didn't get the proof of origin in hand, they may still declare to the importing customs, or in some parties, they allow, even if the importer didn't declare, to enjoy the preferential treatment, they may still get the refund of excess duties or deposit after the goods have been imported. And the detailed operational guideline will be released by individual importing parties, and they may have their detailed requirements for this part. But generally, post-importation claims are allowed in RCEP. Next slide, please. The articles related to denial of preferential treatment includes three articles. The first one is the denial of preferences, denial of preference article itself. So if the goods are not meet rules of origin requirements, or the exporter, producer, or importer fails to comply with the relevant requirements I mentioned before, or during the verification, the importing party didn't get sufficient information, or the one, for example, exporter or the competent authority in the exporting party and so on, they failed to respond to the written request within a time frame set it by the importing party, or the request for verification visit was refused, and the importing party has no way to verify whether the goods are originating. In these kind of situations, the goods will be denial of preferential tariff treatment. And for the detailed requirements, you may refer to the articles. Next slide, please. But there are exceptions, or we say allowance or tolerance for the discrepancy of proof of origin or the declaration. And the third one is third-party invoice. In FTAs, it stipulated very clear that third-party invoice should not be the excuse, or should not be the only reason to denial of preference. I saw the question previously are related to the third-party invoice, and I can say definitely that the third-party invoice is allowed in RCEP. However, on the proof of origin, some of the information need to be indicated so that the importing country can connect this third-party invoice with the goods as well as the proof of origin. So yes, they're allowed. And the second exceptions would be the minor discrepancies or errors. For example, if there are only slight discrepancies, like the quantities are not exactly the same, they may lack of 5 grams or kilograms, for example, or other slight discrepancies. This will not cause directly the denial of preference. Or there are typos or omissions or other protrusions. For this kind of, and in some countries, I understand that some exceptions for discrepancy in HS code may also recognized as minor discrepancies because they are not the fault of the importer or the goods. So it's stipulated very clear that the minor discrepancies or errors should not cause the denial of preference. However, this might be the source of verification because some discrepancies might indicate their right faults, or their right might forge fraudulence for these goods. Therefore, the discrepancies might be the source of or the reason of verification. Next slide, please. And we have the transitional provisions for goods in transit. This is only for the first stage of implementation. So the importer may claim within 180 days after the enforcement. And next slide, please. These verification requirements are something that our business need to be familiar with, and mostly these are applied by the customs, so I will not get into the detail. Next slide, please. The record keeping requirements are for everyone. So we have at least 3 years requirements for everyone, and they can be kept digitalized or electronic and so on in all forms as we want. Next slide, please. So for the advice to the business, I think that first of all, you need to make sure you understand the tariff reduction for your own products. And then you will you can check the preferential tariff rates, because we have several FTAs in the area, in this region. So you may choose the best one for you. And you need to be familiar with the origin criteria for your products and obey the OCP requirements. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Ding, for very comprehensive presentations. So our last presenter is the attorney Vincent Phillips Maro Nila. He's the Assistant Commissioner of the Bureau of Customs to the Philippines. He will provide us an overview of the custom procedures and trade facilitation under RCEP Agreement. You may have the screen, Mr. Jed.
I think, Effendi, I think I gave a copy of the presentation to you. May I request you to share the presentation?
Yes, we're sharing it.
I'll just
Thank you.
I'll just ask you to go. Okay, so the CPTF chapter of RCEP is actually contained in the final draft as chapter 4. During the negotiations, of course, the sub-working group on customs procedure and trade facilitation was the one tasked to actually negotiate this particular chapter. We weren't sure then if it would be a chapter or a sub-chapter, but I think the decision of the leaders is to make this as a chapter, to put emphasis on the importance of this particular chapter to the agreement. So next slide, please. Okay, the order of the presentation today would be discuss a brief history and introduction of the CPTF chapter. Then I'll go on to explain the objectives of the CPTF chapter, the structure by which we negotiated it, and the structure by which it is presented, and of course, the baseline for the text and the highlights of the chapter. So next slide, please. Okay, I'll give you a brief history and introduction on how this particular chapter was negotiated and some of the side stories to it. Next slide, please. Okay, so it took us 4 years to actually negotiate this chapter. We started about late 2013 or early 2014, and we ended in the Bangkok round in 2018. It took us 21 rounds to finish the negotiations, and it's also fitting that the final text is comprised of 21 articles. So 4 years, 21 rounds, and 21 articles. The chapter covers general principles and specific commitments that mainly ensures the predictability, consistency, and transparency in the application of customs laws and regulations under the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership member countries. Other than, of course, customs procedures, this also concerns some trade facilitation component. So we were at some point during the negotiations, we needed to get clearance from our capital, respective capital, as to other provisions that we felt needed to be in the CPTF chapter, but are beyond customs procedures and therefore would entail a policy direction that will have to be decided on by capital. So fortunately, we were able to get them, and that's why we were able to complete the articles that was assigned to us and that we needed to ensure to be included in this chapter. So next slide, please. So basically, that's the overview of that particular negotiations. Before we started negotiating this particular chapter, we sought guidance coming from, of course, the trade in goods and the leaders on what they expect the outcomes of this particular chapter would be. So we were given specific objectives, and these objectives are mainly, the next slide, please. Number one, we were tasked to come up with a modern, comprehensive, high quality, and mutually beneficial customs procedures and trade facilitation agreement. We were also tasked to agree to a broader and deeper engagement with significant improvements over the existing ASEAN Plus FTAs and the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, or the WTO TFA. While, of course, recognizing the individual and diverse circumstances of the participating countries. We were also tasked to include provisions to facilitate trade and enhance transparency in trade relations between the participating countries, as well as provisions to facilitate the RCEP countries' engagement in the global and regional supply chains. I think what's the plus points for my group when we were actually negotiating this is that it was actually, when we were negotiating this, it was the same year when the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement came into play. Of course, there were a lot of issues confronting that agreement in terms of full implementation, but at least we had a model or a format to actually look into. Not to mention that a lot of the ASEAN plus one free trade agreement started to actually recognize the value of having a customs procedure and trade facilitation chapter in their own respective FTAs. So we looked at those together with the WTO agreement on trade facilitation and the recently concluded 2013 ASEAN customs agreement as a baseline to actually formulate and move forward with the negotiations of this chapter. Next slide. Now, when we were negotiating this, we needed to come up with a structure so that the chapter would be orderly and we would be able to identify the essential elements that needed to come up with a basic and an effective and an all-inclusive customs procedure and trade facilitation agreement. So we came up with this particular structure. Next slide, please. Okay, if you look at the, I'll provide you with the link of the CPTF text, the final text that is, I think, can be shown in the RCEP website being handled by ASEAN, of course. And if you look at that particular text, you would see that we actually identified key elements before we actually provided for provisions and text to those particular provisions. So we wanted to have first framework article that would define in the agreement our objective, which we already discussed earlier. So you would see in the agreement that we have an objective chapter. We wanted to define the scope of the agreement because much like the rules of origin and the operational certification procedures. Customs procedure is also a specialized field, and there are rules and regulations that actually defines them. And each of us has our very own customs administration that has its own legal basis, or what we call in negotiating term, we call that legal documents. We all have our very own legal document that defines the scope and the powers of our own customs administration and our trade facilitation offices. So we wanted to define under that particular context up to what extent this particular agreement can actually cover in terms of commitment our member states, our RCEP participating member states. Okay, so, and of course, it was very important for us also to define each and every word. You know, customs is, again, a very specialized field. It actually allows, there's a language, there's a separate language to it. There's a specific language that you apply to it. There are nomenclatures that are very unique to customs only. So that if you do not define these nomenclatures well, there might be some confusion to how these nomenclatures are actually being used in other chapters of the agreement. So we wanted to limit that, and we wanted to be clear on that, so that when you refer to the chapter, there are specific reference points as to how particular terminologies are being defined. And of course, because the task is to come up with systems that would enable customs administrations of the RCEP participating countries to have policies in terms of transparency, predictability. We wanted to define, we wanted to identify an element of transparency. So there you can see our transparency articles mainly. You can see the element or the article on transparency and the article on inquiry points. The transparency article mainly comes from a mixture of the text of the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, and of course, the transparency provisions being brought into in our respective laws and ASEAN FTA plus agreements. So it's safe to say that the provisions that we agreed on, we also agreed on to add on to the commitments already existing. Meaning, if every one of us are signatory to the WTA Trade Facilitation Agreement, we wanted to agree to an RCEP CPTF chapter that would provide further improvements to those commitments. And therefore, safe to say that the RCEP CPTF agreement is the most modern, most comprehensive, and the most liberal trade facilitation agreement that you can find in terms of customs procedures and trade facilitation. I'm saying this because I've also read the CPTF chapter of TPP. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership CPTF chapter is mainly based on the text of the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement. While the RCEP CPTF chapter is more than that. I'll explain later. We have a lot of commitments that we made sure would be WTO ATF plus, and would be an improvement, a great improvement to the current ASEAN and ASEAN plus CPTF chapters. Of course, we went into, which is critical, our core articles. These are articles that would define and would set specific commitments to critical customs areas. Some of which, this is just an example. Of course, the core articles make up majority of the 21 articles that we'd agreed on. But some of the critical ones, we've established specific commitment under customs procedures, in the customs procedures article. We made sure that there was an application of information technology article that would ensure commitments to to the RCEP participating countries, customs administration, and other trade facilitation offices of the use of information technology in all facets of their clearance procedures. We also defined policies that would be predictable and consistent in terms of applying risk management. We made sure that all RCEP participating countries recognize pre-arrival processing and that we're consistent with the policies and the direction, at least on what pre-arrival processing is and what it entails to each and every member of the RCEP participating countries. And the uniqueness of this particular agreement you can find in the implementation arrangement that we agreed on. One of the, I think, when we were discussing this and we were negotiating this, we were very much, of course, impressed with how several states were able to agree on specific articles in the trade facilitation agreement. But unfortunately, the loophole or the weak point of that particular agreement comes in the implementation phase. For that to be agreed on, and of course, the TFA, in terms of the level of having it concluded for negotiations, it's much more difficult because of the number of countries that actually participated in it. RCEP, we were only 10 states, and 6 of us, we were 16 states. 6 of us were already lumped into one because ASEAN has been working so long, and we've actually went through this negotiation with the attitude that ASEAN will work as one, so that would make it easier for an agreement to be reached. So, but still, we recognize that the difficulty again in the TFA was that even though you had a very comprehensive and a very modern trade facilitation agreement, implementation commitments were the issues. So we wanted to address that in this particular CPTF chapter of RCEP. We wanted to, at first, of course, the dream was to actually implement this at the time of its entry into force. So everybody else implementing a WTO plus and a modern CPTF chapter at the same time during the entry into force of this agreement. Unfortunately, we encountered the same issues as that of the trade facilitation agreement in the WTO. So we had to improvise, but we needed to have an implementation arrangement that is better and that would capture the essence of why this particular chapter is essential in this agreement. So we did have implementation arrangement similar to that of the WTO ATF, but this time around, there were specific timelines committed by each RCEP participating countries. So the categories, there were no categories, there were only specific timelines per each commitment. So there would be predictability in terms of when would you expect RCEP participating countries to implement a particular provision or commitment under this chapter. So that's how we framed it, and this is how if you look at the general chapter in the web page, the final text, this is basically the flow that you would see. There are 4 core principles that we wanted to forward, and each of these principles are reflected in that particular agreement by way of the articles under these core principles. So next slide, please. Okay, so after defining our core principles, we wanted to have to ease the negotiation and to fast track the negotiations and make it a little bit well, not really fast track, to make it a little bit easier than what we've seen in the other negotiating groups. We were all, before the CPTF group was actually formed, we were all, I guess we were all at ROO and we all saw how difficult that negotiation was. So we wanted to have a change of pace. In fact, in the beginning stage of this particular negotiation, we struggled with our schedule because our representatives to the CPTF were the same representatives of the negotiating countries in the rules of origin working group, so that we'd have to divide the schedule first to the CPTF and then to the rules of origin working group, or vice versa, until it became clear that that can no longer be done, and we needed to have separate representations in order to move this forward. So that came on at the middle part of the negotiation. So learning from experiences that we had in other negotiations of the FTAs, and learning from the experience that we had in our early participation in other chapters of the RCEP, we wanted to identify and agree on at least a baseline of our text and a baseline of our principles. So I'll discuss now where we got those baselines and some of the highlights of the chapter. Next slide, please. Of course, again, what made our work a little bit easier was that our negotiation was starting at the same time that the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement had been concluded. So therefore, it was very easy to have that as a reference point. Here you are negotiating for a modern, comprehensive, all-inclusive trade facilitation, customs procedure and trade facilitation chapter. And you have with you a just recently concluded trade facilitation agreement, which almost all the countries in the world are signatories to, and at that point was the most comprehensive trade facilitation agreement there is. The WTO TFA not only resounded the revised Kyoto Convention then, but it improved on a lot of its aspects and made specific commitments. So we started off as having that as our baseline. Unfortunately for us, because of the diversity and because of the specific uniqueness of each country in terms of customs rules, in terms of its bureaucratic rules, we needed to find a second baseline if we cannot use and improve on the WTO TFA provisions, or if there are no TFA provisions that other countries during the negotiations wanted to include on in the RCEP CPTF chapter. So as a secondary baseline, we used our existing ASEAN and ASEAN Plus trade facilitation provisions. So there were several of those. We had the ASEAN customs agreement. We also had in our several ASEAN Plus agreements already amendments that would forward certain trade facilitation principles. So while working on our draft text, we had a reference wherein we have a comparative analysis on the provisions of the WTO ATF and, of course, the provisions of the ASEAN Plus Trade Facilitation Agreement, which made it very easier to have a baseline text and work on that text for improvement. So did we? Yes, we did. A number of the commitments under the WTO we've made improvements on in this chapter. Most significant of which is, of course, a commitment to work towards concrete timelines with respect to a number of customs procedures, such as, of course, a 90-day period for advance ruling, a 48-hour timeliness for release of goods from customs, a 6-hour timeline for the release of perishable goods, and an express shipment from customs. So unlike the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, this particular agreement, there were specific timelines committed by each party to ensure that your goods that are coming in and are traded between and among RCEP participating countries would have predictability in terms of its processing and timelines for its release. Second, we we had a binding commitment to apply risk management and the use of information technology in customs procedures, including making information available online and allowing for the electronic submission of documents. If you look at the customs procedures article, and if you look at all the supporting articles in the core articles of the chapter, you would see that most of them, if not all of them, would promote the application of risk management, the application of technology in terms of processing, and the application of the application of the availability of inquiry points, of data and information online, so that all relevant documents and all relevant data will be available to the transacting public at the click of a button, and critical customs procedures would also be made available remotely through the use of information technology. Electronic submission of documents was also, of course, committed under this particular agreement. We also agreed on an implementation arrangement that provides for specific timelines, just as I discussed a while ago. Now, again, this is a further improvement to the WTO ATF, wherein the categories were based on the capacity and the support needed by a particular member state in order to be able to implement specific commitments, but not in this agreement. In this agreement, member states, participating countries took it upon themselves to advance their customs procedures to meet specific timelines, so that they'll be able to meet their commitments in the timelines that they've provided. And these were all voluntarily given. These were all voluntarily committed by each parties in terms of specific timelines given for some of the provisions. But majority of the provisions, I may say, if we are to implement RCEP by early next year, most of the countries would have been over the hump in terms of the timelines that they've provided, and would be able to implement, if not all, but majority of the commitments under the CPTF chapter of RCEP. Lastly, and of course more important, we have a strong customs cooperation article, something not found in the WTO TFA. It calls on customs authorities of RCEP parties to provide assistance to each other and ensure the smooth flow of goods in the region, as well as to support each other developing their own customs regime. So these are all highlights. I concentrated on the highlights because if you look at the chapter, these are all commitments already made during ASEAN Plus and ASEAN Free Trade Agreements. These are also commitments made in some of your bilateral agreements, and these are also commitments made in the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. But for these particular items, there are specific and concrete add-ons that we felt are very critical in improving trade facilitation in the region, especially when RCEP comes into play. To emphasize the importance, of course, of the CPTF chapter, studies have shown that reduction in tariff in terms of applying a more liberal rules of origin to be able to lower the cost is not really effective if we're not able to lower the cost that is burdened by way of a very slow trade facilitation of goods within the region. So through this chapter, our hope is that we were able to complement the liberal or the more open rules of origin and trade in goods chapters, so that whatever the goal of RCEP is, to liberalize our trade and to make trade within the region more accessible, and therefore promoting a very vibrant economic growth. We hope that this can be achieved through this chapter. So I guess that's it. I know it's very short, but really the The chapter is very simple. It's very easy to read, and the commitments are very solid. Next slide, please. I would just encourage everyone. I've actually, there's a link. I've hyperlinked the link to the legal text of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership here. You can check out the CPTF chapter. It's the CPTF chapter is chapter 4. It's an easy read, 21 articles. And I assure you that if you made use of some of those commitments, there are a lot of customs issues and trade facilitation issues that you might see already resolved under your current state. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you very much, Attorney Jed, for the very insightful presentations. So we moving on to the next part of the program. We will have panel discussions, and this session will discuss on the implications and the future prospect of the RCEP in the area that we just presented, from the perspective of our distinguished speaker from the government, business, as well as an academic sector, and especially on how to facilitate business to take full advantage of the RCEP benefit when the agreement comes into effect. 3 excellent panelists will join us today, and this panel discussion will moderate by Mr. Pan Manha. He's the Senior Officer of the External Economic Relation at the ASEAN Secretariat. So now I would like to pass the screen to Ha. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. And I know that we are running late behind schedule, so I will be quick. But first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer for giving us a chance to discuss the advantages of RCEP rules for RCEP and CPTF chapter. I would like to especially thank DHG Satpinder for his excellent initiative to bring this webinar to make RCEP closer to the business community, especially to SME. It's a very great honor for me to be along with the excellent presenter as well as panelists who are RCEP negotiator, especially for those chapters. And I would like to call that the rules for this chapter is very tough chapter when we negotiated it, and it's the last chapter that we finalized as the last round. So today we already have listened the presentations on the basic contents of RCEP rules for origin, OCP, CPTF, and now the panelists will discuss the advantages of this chapter and how this chapter will have the business, especially SME, to utilize RCEP commitments, because we already know that not all the product can enjoy the tariff commitment, just only the products which has RCEP originating stated can enjoy it. And we have 3 panelists today, and I will introduce one by one. But first panelist will be Mr. Salvador Buban. We normally call him Bas, and he is a policy fellow at AREA. He has more than 20 years of experience in trade policy formulation and trade. And he also have experience in the areas of market access of trading goods, rules of origin, custom procedure, and trade facilitations on the regional and multilateral level. So it means that must have a wide knowledge on ASEAN Plus 1 FTA as well as RCEP. And in this regard, my question to Bas, or topic to Bas to discuss is that many people believe that RO or OCP of RCEP is better and more trade facilitative than ASEAN Plus 1 FTA. So how do you think, Bas?
Thank you, Ha, for that introduction and the question. I understand we're running out of time, but let me try to highlight some of the points that regarding RCEP and how it compares with the ASEAN Plus 1 FTA. But before that, let me greet everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. First of all, let me thank the ASEAN Secretariat and the East Asia Business Council for organizing this webinar series on RCEP, and of course for inviting me for the second session. It's good to see friends and former colleagues who have been involved in the negotiations, and I would like to thank you for your comprehensive presentation, as well as the insights on the agreement and some of those anecdotes and the highlights that happened during the negotiations. Well, I could not underscore more how important rules of origin to determine the nationality, we call it the nationality of a good or product, to be able to avail of the preferential tariff treatment under an FTA like RCEP. Of course, we know that without RCEP, it could be next impossible to trade in an FTA. I would also note that as having been involved in the various ASEAN +1 FTAs, I would say that RCEP RO negotiations was the most contentious and I guess most challenging among the +1 FTAs that we had. Aside from the addressing technical issues, RO negotiators have also to deal with negotiators from 15 countries. And what you have seen is that they also try to address the sensitivities pertaining to tariffs which are impacting the ROO negotiations. It could be observed also that ROO negotiations, to a certain extent, was used to address some of those market access related issues. Setting those issues aside, I would still say that RCEP ROO thus far is somehow better than ASEAN +1 FTAs. RCEP in a way consolidated, or ROO of the ASEAN +1 FTAs. By consolidating the ROO, it expands the sourcing of originating inputs from the RCEP parties, making it easier to comply with originating criteria, as it allows producers, the traders, to accumulate inputs from more sources, and thereby easier for goods to be eligible for tariff preferences. Before RCEP, let's say under ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA, you only have 12 parties where you could accumulate. And in RCEP, you have 15 parties, and some of these parties are major sources of inputs for materials in production, especially if you're looking at the supply chain in the East Asia region. For instance, if you are an exporter, of furniture or table from Indonesia, prior to RCEP, you're exporting to Australia under the ANSFTA. This means that you're only allowed to use originating inputs from ANZ FTA parties, but not able to use inputs or raw materials from China, for example, which could be considered as non-originating input if you are looking at it in the context of the ANZ FTA. Or similarly, if you are exporting to Korea under the ASEAN-Korea FTA, originating inputs you can only use are from ASEAN Korea, but not from other parties. So under RCEP, it's easier to comply, as we said, and this always will be highlighted by our previous speakers. And it is easy to comply with our origin requirements, and also it widens the sources of inputs. But again, let me just put a small note, or probably a reminder to all of us, that even if there is an RCEP ROO wherein most of the ASEAN plus FTA partners are already parties to RCEP, if you are an exporter using the ASEAN Australia New Zealand FTA or ATIGA, for example, and you are using those FTAs because the tariffs are relatively low at this point, that the ROO that will be used for those FTAs are not the RCEP ROO. You still have to use the ATIGA ROO and the ANZ FTA ROO. I'm just reminding us because you might get confused. For example, the trading under AKFTA, for example, we can say that we can use the RCEP ROO. Aside from the obvious that the greater number of parties will allow you to accumulate from more sources, RCEP has adopted a more trade facilitative, co-equal and alternative rules for most products in the PSR list. I think our previous presenter highlighted also those, and they have identified that there is a PSR annex where you can actually find the specific rules that would be applied to each of the product. The implications of having more co-equal and alternative rules would allow exporters or producers more options on the origin criteria to use, and it would be easier to comply with the ROO rules. And one of the, I think there are only 2 FTAs which has this, and I think RCEP has a more liberal interpretation or application of this rule. It has adopted a chemical reaction rule for goods in chapters 29 and 38. This means that aside from the option of using the RVC 40 or the CTC rule, you can also apply the chemical reaction rule on products as identified in those PSRs. Although the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand as a provision on chemical reaction rule, the application of the chemical reaction rule in the ANZ FTAs is a sequential manner, wherein you still have to prove that the RVC or the CTC rule could not be used, and only then you can adopt the chemical reaction rule. In RCEP, automatically, if you can, then you can immediately apply the chemical reaction rule without going into the sequence of proving that the RVC 40% or the CTC could not be possible. In addition, I would say that RCEP ROO has also clarified the text language of the provisions, which would normally cause implementation problems. I saw some of the questions in the chat box that in terms of interpretation, we also have some problems with regard to how the implementers, even the stakeholders, would actually look at the text of the agreement and how they would implement it. So in this particular, in RCEP, we tried to address, the negotiators tried to address these provisions. For example, in the context of direct consignment, for example, in the context of back-to-back, or even in the language that we use in the third-party invoicing, which we saw that if you look at some of the questions pertaining to third-party invoicing, there are some questions pertaining to it. So we will try to address that quickly a bit later. If you recall, in the first webinar last month, if you attended the TIG, the Trade in Goods Agreements 1, there was a discussion on tariff differential, wherein the tariff differential provision is under trade in goods, but it has implications on the way how ROO is implemented for some products that are differentiated by parties. Although the ROO to be complied in the TD provisions, especially those goods that are in the appendix, may have a different rules, RCEP was able or tried to manage it and mitigate the situation by adopting a common rule, which makes it easier to implement. But personally, I think if you look at the TD article, you need also to look at the appendix, because there are certain rules that you need to follow, even if, especially if the goods are listed in the parties' schedule of commitments where it is considered as tariff differentials. So basically, when we talk about tariff differential, we refer to the different tariff treatment that an importing party applies to the same originating good. So far, not all parties are applying the tariff differential. So we have China, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam are the only countries applying tariff differential, but the rest are not. And some of them have indicated that they are suspending, for example, in the case of Malaysia, some of the provisions pertaining to TD is not implemented at the moment. So let me just quickly go to the OCP, particularly in the proof of origin, which I think our colleague Nan has already mentioned, wherein if you look at the ASEAN +1 FTAs, it has only been using certificate of origin issued by the issuing authority as the proof of origin to claim for preferential tariff. But under RCEP, aside from allowing use of CO as a proof of origin, we are also allowing approved exporters to issue their own declaration, which means less cost for the private sector, because they are the trader exporter. They can also issue their own certificate of origin, provided they are approved exporter. And of course, as there are also conditions on how to apply, how to authorize a certified approved exporter. So the agreement has identified those, and you can actually look it up in the text of the agreement. So eventually, we also noticed that exporters will be allowed to issue declaration of origin by exporter. So this one, it's not only about the approved exporter, but actually you as an exporter, you can actually issue this certificate of origin without having to be considered as an approved exporter. But this implementation is phased, and I think it was shown in the previous slide in the presentation, the number of years where this particular provision would kick in and enters into force for the agreement. One of the things that's also pending and important is the importer declaration. something that is also being discussed in RCEP, but actually it's being implemented by one party. But the rest of the other parties are not implementing the importer's declaration. So that is something that we have to consider and wait for. So the OCP also further clarified certain provisions like the back-to-back arrangement, where in the previous FTAs, the goods subject to back-to-back certificate of origin should remain under customs control. I think right now in the back-to-back certificate of origin and the provisions, I think we have provided a more liberal interpretation or liberal language pertaining to the implementation of certain of this kind of arrangements. In RCEP, goods are no longer required to be in the customs control, and with regard to the back-to-back proof of origin, there are only certain conditions that you have to follow to ensure and that goods are still considered as originating, and you don't have to, especially on the operations like unloading or reloading, provided that they are consistent with the provisions of the agreement. So in a way, I would say, as generally and our colleagues, I would say that RCEP RO is somehow provides that kind of avenue, which is more facilitative compared to the ASEAN +1 FTAs. Thank you,
Thank you, Bas, for your very comprehensive comparison of RCEP and ASEAN +1 FTA. Yes, I have to recognize that negotiators work very hard to make RCEP rules of origin chapter better and more trade facilitative than ASEAN +1 FTA. Like what you say, we have a user-friendly text, and we can have later on we can approve exporter or any exporter or manufacturer can do the origin clarifications declaration. Sorry, one thing I need to emphasize that RCEP rules of origin is one of the chapters that value adds to the most ASEAN +1 FTA, especially in terms of streamlining different rules into just one single rules. Then this can have to resolve the neutral bow effect or spaghetti bow effects, especially for ASEAN country enterprises. Because when we export to like China, if we use ASEAN-China FTA, we have a different set of rules of origin. When we export to Japan, then it's a different set of rules of origin. But now under RCEP, we have just one set of rules of origin, and we follow that. Thank you very much, Bas. And now I would like to move to the second panelist, Raymond Yi. Raymond is currently the Vice President of Custom and Regulatory Affairs for DHL Express, covering Asia Pacific, excluding China. And his roles working with governments, particularly custom and trade agencies, on various reform and modernization programs. Ramon have more than 25 years experience in dealing with custom and trade issue, covering both public and private sector. Hi, Ramon. We already listened to Bas analyze the rules of origin, RCEP rules of origin, and how it facilitates SMEs. And now, can you have us to give us the CPTF chapter that how it can benefit the business, especially SME, and how CPTF chapter can facilitate trade among those RCEP countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think I would like to first express my thanks to the Secretariat for inviting DHL Express. As you know, we've been in Asia for a very long time, and we since the 1970s actually, and we carry quite a lot of shipments across the Asia Pacific. A lot of them are the RCEP countries, and so we obviously we are in a unique position as a global trade facilitator because we are at the front line and we see the bottlenecks at the borders. I would first like to congratulate all the RCEP negotiators for having passed this monumental agreement. Obviously, industry has been waiting to see the final passing of this agreement, which we saw recently. And this is quite critical, I think, for a lot of us. Just to put in context, a recent survey that was done by the EU ASEAN Business Council, right, saw that there were still a lot of significant barriers to trade, which businesses saw, at least for the ASEAN region. You know, like the recent one saw about 81% of respondents saw an increase in barriers that will impact their regional supply chains. 97%, up from 86%, saw an increase in non-tariff barriers in ASEAN. And, you know, the key areas that were concerned to them were things like customs procedures, lack of standards harmonization, non-tariff barriers, and so on and so forth. So, you know, the passing of this RCEP agreement couldn't have come at a more opportune time, especially even during these times of COVID, where businesses are suffering quite tremendously. There's a lot of pressure on cost, and there's a lot of pressure also on top line sales. So, you know, the more opportunities for businesses, the better it is. And so for us at least, what we see is how this RCEP is now potentially the world's largest FTA, you know, and involves, you know, the economic powerhouses of East Asia, specifically China, Japan, and Korea. And that for me is a feather in the cap for the trade negotiators. Congratulations on involving some of these key powerhouses, because we know that, you know, the East Asian countries have been negotiating an FTA for a long time, but unable to actually come to any form of a specific agreement. And the fact that this was all managed to be included within the RCEP umbrella is quite critical, because we see a lot of regional value chains, not just involving the ASEAN countries, but involving the East Asian countries, right? You know, they are not just importing and manufacturing hubs, they are sourcing hubs, but they are also final markets, right? And so the fact that RCEP is able to do that, I think is really quite important. We see that for some of DHL's very large customers, a lot of them in the mobile phones, in IT and so on, a significant part of their supply chain and their sourcing are all actually within the RCEP region. And so, you know, the fact that we have now an FTA involving all these countries, I think that is quite significant. Now, let me quickly respond to your question, specifically on some of the positives that we see. Now, I think it's very important to highlight that for businesses, it's not so much what's in the provisions, which I will talk about, but it's what we see on the ground and what we would like to see on the ground. So, you know, bearing in mind that RCEP has not yet been ratified fully and in effect, so I can only talk about some of the provisions and some of the positives that we see. Obviously, there will be other areas where we would like to see further improvement, but let me just touch on some of the positives, right? As Attorney Marinella said in his presentation, there's a lot of aspects about RCEP in the customs procedures and trade facilitation provisions that deal with important areas, right? One is promoting consistency, transparency, you know, the imposition of pre-arrival processing, so the ability to process declarations before they arrive, you know, more detailed enumeration of benefits for authorized economic operators, you know, an opportunity for industry to comment on new regulations. You know, these are all very positive things that industry looks at, you know, and for me, what is even more critical is, you know, the RCEP provisions themselves have committed timeframes on, for example, you know, 48 hours that goods should be cleared within 48 hours of arrival, right? And for express shipments within 6 hours of arrival. You know, there are other commitments like the ability to obtain a release of your shipments even before you pay your duties and taxes, you know, promotion of risk management principles, and so on and so forth. So, you know, all these are, you know, better than what we see in existing ASEAN +1 FTAs, or even within the ASEAN, the Artiga itself, right? And so for me, this is quite important. Now, the other aspect to this, as mentioned also by Marinella, is the ability to do advanced rulings, right? And, you know, involving classification, origin, and customs valuation, you know, and these are really WTO plus, what I call, you know, things that are better than what are already committed within the World Trade Organization. Of interest to us, of course, for DHL is that RCEP specifically recognizes express clearance, so the ability to clear shipments, time-sensitive shipments. It makes provisions for de minimis thresholds, simplified clearance, and so on and so forth, right? And these take things a step further than what is already in the WTO. So, in a nutshell, I think I won't reiterate what has already been mentioned, but a lot of these we as industry recognize that it took a lot of effort in the negotiations by the trade negotiators, and a lot of toing and froing, and a lot of countries obviously also had to ensure that they were able to make these commitments given the timelines and so on that were required. And so we would like to call that and recognize that, at least from the industry side. Thanks.
Thanks, Ram, for the analysis of how CPTF chapter can facilitate the trade in the region, especially how it can have to come up with the regional value chains or supply chains in the regions. And it's obviously that RCEP bring a lot of benefits to regional business. For example, under ASEAN Plus 1 FTA, we don't have a CPTF chapter, or just only have a very few provision on CPTF chapter, provisions on CPTF. And now I move to the panelists, the last panelist today, Ms. Karen Jiao, who is currently a consular and Singapore economic officials at the Permanent Mission of Singapore to ASEAN. She oversees the ASEAN economic integration issues, including ASEAN Plus 1 or external Plus 1 FTA and external partners. Karen have how to say experience with us during the RCEP negotiation. She was Singapore lead of rules of origin chapter in the negotiations. And hi Karen, Bas already analyzed how RCEP rules of origin facilitative and better than ASEAN Plus 1. Raymond already analyzed the CPTF, how it can facilitate to come to the regional business, and especially in the creation of the regional value chain and supply chain. So can you help us, because I understand that RCEP are always not ready to use. I mean, the advantages we have there, but it's not ready to use for the SME or for the business. So in the perspective of the government officials who already participated in the negotiations, what is your advice for the business community, especially SME, to utilize these advantages that we already analyzed so far? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ha. So good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank the East Asia Business Council and the ASEAN Secretariat for organizing this webinar, and also giving me this opportunity to share my perspective. So it's actually really nice to be reunited with my former negotiating partners. And as everybody has said, we indeed worked very hard, and we tried as much as possible to make this agreement work for businesses. And also, lastly, to thank the businesses who have registered yourself and continue to be here. So I hope what I have will be useful for all of you. So actually, to sum it all up, if you actually look at the presentations today, right, rules of origin are key to unlocking tariff savings. So it's actually critical to look from two fundamental perspectives, which have been presented here. First, the rules will determine whether your product qualify for preferential tariffs. And then the documents will certify whether your product certify the rule. And you have heard from many people about how RCEP is bigger, better, faster, mightier, sexier. And I want to focus your attention now, like for businesses, on how you can prepare yourselves to take advantage of the RCEP. Typically, it's a 5-step process, as you can see from this colorful slide that I have taken from Singapore's personal outreach session to our businesses in Singapore. Step 1, identify the HS code. Step 2, identify where you're exporting to. Step 3, check the RCEP tariff reduction schedules, and then check the rule, whether it's WOP or if it satisfies a PSR. And then you fill up the necessary documentation. And of course, as they always say, the devil is always in the details. So I have a few reminders, not intended to scare you, but rather give you a realistic sense of what it looks like when businesses use FTAs in general. And like what Raymond mentioned earlier, what really matters is what you see on the ground. Can I have my frog? The frog. So the next slide, Mark Twain said before, eat a live frog every morning and nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day. This is an analogy that speaks to the time and effort that businesses will need to actually use, and that you will need to actually use before you can benefit either from the RCEP or any other FTAs. And I've compiled this list based on the experiences that I've heard from SMEs who have leveraged on Singapore's network of FTAs. And it has given them tremendous tariff savings. And what you need to do are a few simple rules. First, always confirm the HS code for your product. So there have been occasions where companies have been exporting under certain HS codes, but then they find out, when they actually study the legal text as well as the tariff reduction schedule, that their product actually falls under another HS code under an FTA. So always consult your officials, consult your customs people, consult your business councils, also check with your importers on what is the correct HS code to actually export your product in, because we call this discrepancy, but it may actually cause you potential tariff savings not to be denied. The second thing is to know the rules of origin. Always, we have given you the slides presentations today. If you have further questions, please always go to the officials who have negotiated the tax, your business councils, your chambers, and some of you may not have like big resources to actually hire a consultant to actually help you read the text, and it's actually useful. And I understand that all RCEP countries are in the process of doing extensive outreach to their businesses, and in particular in ASEAN, where more than 90% of our businesses are SMEs. And we really want our SMEs to benefit from this FTA. So be free, to actually consult. You can even ask people like Ha from the Secretariat, send your queries to the Secretariat. And I think attend as many webinars, sessions, and ask as many questions that you need to clarify on how you can actually, whether your product actually meets the rules of origin. The next thing that is also related to your rules of origin is actually you need to know your sourcing patterns. You have to talk to your sourcing team, because sometimes if your product has different kind of inputs, minor changes in one little input may actually cause your product to lose originating status. And then you want to bear in mind that we have a special provision in the RCEP called the tariff differential article. So that kind of information about your sourcing pattern will help you quickly make an assessment as to whether your product meets the rule of origin RCEP. Next point, know your options. So RCEP is one of the options. And of course, you want to also know that ASEAN has a suite of ASEAN +1 FTAs. I think we have 6. And you want to go and look for yourself, as you understand the RCEP rules and as you understand the ASEAN +1 rules, choose one that works best for you. And the reason why we have not removed all the other ASEAN +1 FTAs is simply because we want the businesses to actually have a choice, to choose what works best for you. RCEP could be amazing, but it may not work for your product. Sometimes using UNSFATA or even using AKFTA or ACFTA could actually work better for you. And the most important thing about documentation is that you must confirm that you can maintain a robust documentary system as required in the RO chapter. So I think documentary evidence is, I think if I recall correctly, OCP is 3 years. So you must know that when there are provisions for checks by customs officials, and sometimes a check does not go back to your last exporting consignment. It could go back for a certain period of time, and it could actually cost a lot for companies if they do not have such a documentary system required under the RO. So I think that is all I have. So again, thank you for listening and participating in this webinar. And I hope this few pointers, just remember the frog, have been useful and valuable to you. And over to you, Ha. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, for your very practical advice to the business and SMEs, especially the concrete steps to guide how the business can gain the rules of origin status for their products. And have to recognize that even we have RCEP, but the exporter need to check whether ASEAN +1 FTA is still relevant for their products or not, because I believe that ASEAN +1 FTA still have their, how to say, strength in comparison of RCEP in the bilateral trade between ASEAN and its external partner. Then now we move to the second part of our panelist discussion today. We receive a lot of interested questions. It's mean that our, how to say, webinar receive a lot of interest from the business sector. It's a good signal for us to work hard while as the same as we negotiated very hard. Then we receive like around 40 questions, and most of questions, some questions ask about the entry to force of the agreement itself. And I think that in the chat box, Ms. Anna Robenio already responded, but basically we need three AFPs and 6 AMS to ratify the RCEP agreement first. Then the target date to have RCEP EAF is January 2022, I mean next year, and the implementation would be in accordance with those where RCEP has already EAF. And for the ASEAN member state, I mean some question on the ratification of ASEAN member state. Now we have Singapore already ratified, and China and Japan. For ASEAN member state, we're hoping that they can ratify the agreement by the end of this year, so that they can together implement it. And one question, I think that one question is interesting for us is that how the third-party invoicings and back-to-back is come from, I don't know, come from, but these they raise question that if back-to-back can involve in the non-RCEP party, and and if how to say, a company is Hong Kong owned the product, but they have the origin ASEAN origin criteria status and put in the China border house, then can China issue this back-to-back CO form under RCEP agreement? So Bas, can you help me to answer this question?
Thank you, Ha, for that, and thank you for the question. Is the third-party invoice issued by non-member? Yes. The short answer is yes. It doesn't have to be a party to the agreement to be able to issue a third-party invoice. So the answer is yes. You can, a non-party can, or non-member of the RCEP can actually issue a third-party invoice. And the second question is about the back-to-back certificate of origin. Yes, if the certificate of if the goods are in a customs bonded zone in China, and although the company is owned by a Hong Kong company, it actually doesn't matter as long as the issuing authority In Hong Kong, in China, we will be able to issue the back-to-back certificate of origin. But of course, the back-to-back certificate of origin that will be issued from China will be issued to a destination, a final destination, which is a party to RCEP. So I think that is something that to be clarified on that. So yes, you can issue a back-to-back for that.
Thank you, Bas. One question is on the percentage of product to be considered ASEAN origin, and it depends on type of product. The question is that, is it correct? And these there are different percentages for each product. Kun Suriton, you are the one who negotiated the PSR. Then can you help me to answer it? Thanks, Kun.
Thank you, Ha. No, we don't apply different percentage on RVC component in RCEP. Only 40%. RVC 40 is the only one RVC component that we have. It's unlike CTC rules. For CTC rule, we have a chain of tariff subheadings, chain of tariff headings, or chain of chapter. But for RVC, we have just RVC 40. This is different from ASEAN Korea. ASEAN Korea, we have RVC 45. We are applying RVC 60, also RVC 70. So this is one thing that we need to highlight, the improvement of RCEP from the existing ASEAN Plus One APA. Thank you.
Thank you, Kun. There's one question on the how to get party to implement what their commitment under RCEP agreement. I think that from perspective of government officials, I believe that there will be RCEP joint committee who have to supervise the implementations of the agreement, and helping joint committee, there will be the subcommittee will be established once the EAF of the agreement to have to supervise the agreement. Then we move to another question that on the chemical reaction rules. Then I would like to have the request from Bas, because when you compare, you said that one of the good thing for RCEP is what chemical reaction rule. So the question is that, what is the rules for the country origin for chemicals like a lubricant? Is mixing ingredients and packing enough for getting the origin criteria of this? Thank you.
Thank you, Ha. But I have the chair of the PSR task force there, Consorin Thorn, who would be very much familiar with this. But I was actually looking at it, and I think it was, if you look at your chapter 20, the PSR notes, there is a definition of what is a chemical reaction rule, and it's also identified the process. So for example, if what is being excluded as considered as a chemical reaction is that if you are dissolving in water or other solvents, elimination of solvents including solvent water, and the addition or elimination of water or crystallization. So these are somehow the exceptions when you look at it in the context of the chemical reaction rule. But I think better if members, those exporters would be able to get in touch with their local, their national focal point or the issuing authority, so that they would be able to provide more information. Because here, if you just say lubricant, it could be any. So we don't know the inputs and the sources. So I think the classification, because it might not be possible, because if you remember your PSR for the chemical reaction rule, it doesn't cover all the chapters in chemicals. So it only covers chapters 29 and 38. And even in chapter 29 and 38, it does not cover the whole of chapter 38. So I think it's better to be very specific about it. What would be the particular product? And then you can actually supply information with your issuing authority, so that you will be able to get a very specific answer for that. But you can check the PSR annex for clarification as well. Thank you, Ha.
Thanks, Bas. Yes, so many questions asked about the specific products. They ask how we can get origin criteria for like a tropical fish, like how to say electronics and auto parts from China. Actually, I want to take this opportunity to introduce there's a website for the all relevant informations for all relevant rules. Actually, this one already introduced by Jet when he made the presentation, the last line, I remember, but I would like to, how to say, reintroduce it. We have the website on rcep.org. Then businesses can, how to say, assess and find the information there. You just need, like a Karen already showed you, you need to identify your IS code. Then from the IS code of your product, you can check what is the relevant rules of origin. I mean, the criteria there, and you apply it for it. Like what is for how to say tuna, then it's CC. Tuna can CC, then you know the rules and you can apply for this. And you can always check the website rcepsec.org. Then one question one question is that how existing Japanese company in Thailand or maybe in one ASEAN country can take advantages of RCEP agreement. Then can Bas and Karen can help me to answer this? Because it's related to, I believe that it's related to the accumulation as well. Thanks. Bas?
Okay. I think I have mentioned it already in my presentation or in my intervention, wherein I actually identified that with the accumulation, any company operating, let's say for the Japan company operating in let's say in Thailand. So if the company was only exporting under AJCEP or under ATIGA, but now with RCEP, you can actually utilize. And then if you are exporting now to ANZ FTA and you're exporting to ASEAN, to Korea under AKFTA, then you will have these wide inputs and sources that would be easier for you to comply with the rules of origin. And actually, with the wide sources of inputs, then it actually helps lower your cost. So I think Karen also underscored that, and I think some of the previous speakers also highlighted the importance of accumulation and how the accumulation would actually be helping in terms of sourcing and making it easier to comply with the rules of origin. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bas, for the answer. Actually, we are running late the schedule because we should finish at 12:30, but it's now 12:42. I try to make it 12:45. And then one of the questions is that from Paul Gibbons on the tariff differential. Actually, we have to recognize or realize that tariff differential is very complicated. And Paul, the one who participated in the negotiation as well, and then just only want to inform Paul that now we are developing the implementing guidelines to help to resolve us how to implement this article. And we will come out soon to facilitate the implementation of the business on the tariff differential. But believe me, tariff differential just only a small part of RCEP commitment, like just only 100. Bas already analyzed only 7 parties implemented, and it 100 lies additional criteria. Bas, can you help me? You are the one of how to say sitting in the discussion on TD. And Karen, can you help me to answer or to further clarify how TD article can work in terms of rules of origin related? Thank you.
Karen, you want to Okay. Well, thank you, Paul, for the question. I think that's actually, if you look at it in the context of tariff differential, or even in terms of the rules of origin, basically you have three modes or three components or elements when it comes to conferring origin. So one is that you have goods subject to tariff differential. So, and you have also, under the goods subject to tariff differential, you have actually the appendix, wherein you will have a 20% DVC, a domestic value content, for you to be able to comply and to be considered as the RCEP exporting country. So if you look at the MIR, the minimum information requirements, it also talks about the RCEP of country of origin, but it also it doesn't only cover those goods subject to tariff differential. So I think these are what we call the third type, which is the common concessions, wherein there's no such thing as common concession in the agreement per se, but we call it a common concession because it is something that is not subject to the tariff differential. So in a sense, it's applied if I'm the importer. Let's say if I'm importing banana, I'm giving the same rate of banana to all. Because if I'm applying tariff differential, I would have different tariff treatment for banana from any of the parties. So in that sense, I think it is it is good to point out that there is a need to have the guidelines, because the tariff differential provision, when it comes to identifying the RCEP country of origin, it only pertains to that. But since the MIR, the minimum information requirements, also talks about those goods not subject to tariff differential, then perhaps it is good to clarify that, so that when we are implementing, we are the definition or how the rules of origin will be applied for those subject to TD will only be confined to those subject to TD. But for those other, for the common concessions, perhaps it should be applied in a different manner, so that it will not be restrictive to for the implementation of RCEP. Otherwise, again, we will not be able to. We will be discouraging people from implementing RCEP. Thank you. I hope it helps.
Thanks, Bas. Yes, we will continue to work on that. To how to guide the businesses as well as the custom officials to implement this TD. So the organizer just reminded me that we late, and that is the last question. I see that there's so many questions coming, but we have to say sorry because we cannot answer due to the time constraint. We cannot answer the questions anymore. And even I have one question for the panelists as well as for presenter, that what should we improve RCEP, our CPTF chapter, but I think it's for the future after we implement it. And you see RCEP is the RCEP is just only want to highlight that this is the first step for the regional economic cooperation, or is not the final step. So we will continue to improve the agreement in the future, but let's implement it first. In this regard, I would like to return the screen to the organizer, Fendi. Thank you very much. Oh, just only one thing, because a lot of requests for the sharing the slides. Yes, we will share the slides. We send the slide via email, because we have your email, and we will share the slides. But at this point in time, you can always watch the YouTube, which have our own presentation, discussion, and as well as slide. But definitely we will share a slide of webinar today for the audience. Thank you. And I would like to return the floor or screen to the organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ha, for moderating the sessions. And I will also thank all the speakers for your insightful discussions. And so this webinar is coming to an end. This has been very fruitful discussions. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your participation. Also, I would like to announce that we are now preparing the next webinar in the coming days. The topic detail and schedule will be disseminated at the soonest. And if you want to rewatch today's webinar, it will be available in the ASEAN Secretary YouTube channel. And we are looking forward to seeing you all at the next webinar. Please keep safe and stay healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
See you.